Hello, and welcome back to Basement Movie Room. This week's going to be a little different. We did not have time to get together and watch a movie, so I'm going to be presenting some quick reviews of movies I watched over the last week or so, which is actually quite a few of them. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started on this. First off, I watched a movie called Mindhorn. You can find this movie on Netflix. It was made in 2016, directed by Sean Foley, who I'd never really heard of before, and starring a few people I really don't know much about, but they're British actors. Julian Barrett, Essie Davis, and a number of other people that you might recognize from possibly character actor roles. So Mindhorn follows the story of a washed up TV detective. Julian Barrett plays him, and he played Detective Mindhorn on TV. And this TV show was shot on the Isle of Man, where Mindhorn was from. The guy who plays Mindhorn is from. So what happens is on this island there's a murder, and the person who they believe committed the murder will only talk to Mindhorn. He doesn't realize Mindhorn was a fake show because he went through a lot of traumatic stuff when he was a kid, and he still is basically 9 years old, sort of mentally. So he asks for Mindhorn to come. Julian Barrett's character decides that this is a way to get back into the public spotlight and become famous again and get movie roles again. So he goes to help and basically doesn't really help that much, but ends up kind of helping. It's kind of a interesting plot. It's somewhat played for comedy. I mean, it is a comedy, but I didn't think it was all that entertaining, to be honest. It wasn't that great. Ultimately, the roles are okay. Steve Coogan also plays a small role in the movie as like a guy from the Mindhorn show that did a lot better with a spin-off show. Julian Barrett's fine in the role. He always reminds me of Colin Firth in this role. But nonetheless, Mindhorn's probably worth checking out if you're looking for a silly comedy that really is just okay. It's fairly short, so you can get through it fairly quickly. And it's got some funny moments along with some decent acting. I would rate that one 2.5 stars. Next up is Key Largo from 1948, directed by John Huston and starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. And Lionel Barrymore, and the gangster himself, Edward G. Robinson. So Key Largo follows the story of a war veteran, World War II veteran, returning home. Well, not really returning home. He's going to Key Largo, Florida, to meet with the father and sister of a man he served with in World War II who died in World War II. He was this man's commanding officer, and they were very good friends, and he's kind of doing a favor to this guy that he asked for on his death to go visit his family and to talk to them and basically just assure them that he died for a good cause. Well, when Humphrey Bogart gets there, he finds the hotel is closed and being rented out by some seedy looking fellows, which he doesn't take too kindly to. Edward G. Robinson is the mysterious man who is renting the hotel, and come to find out that Edward G. Robinson's character is a famous gangster, Johnny something, I can't remember his name, and that he's on the run. He's been deported from the United States back to Italy, but he's trying to get back to the United States to get things going again, and is trying to get back in the United States via a boat. However, there is a hurricane coming into Key Largo during this whole time. There's a side plot with some Native American Seminoles who are being hunted by the police, so there's a lot of drama. Lauren Bacall is fantastic in it. Lionel Barrymore is fantastic. Bogart's always fantastic. Edward G. Robinson is very good in it as well. But there's a lot of drama between Bogart not decide whether he wants to play the hero or not of this story. Ultimately, it's a pretty good movie. It's not one of Bogart's best movies, and I probably would say if you're going to watch a Bogart movie, go with Maltese Falcon or Casablanca. But it is worth checking out. It's got an interesting story. The hurricane puts them all in like a room together and makes some good like thriller drama type stuff and subplots with the police as well. So check it out if you'd like to. I'd rate that one 4 stars. Next up was Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows from 2011, the sequel to the 2009 Sherlock Holmes, directed by Guy Ritchie, starring Robert Downey Jr., Jude Law, and importantly, Jared Harris. So this is the follow-up to the 2009, as I said, and Jared Harris plays Moriarty. He's really the criminal that we really wanted to see. Irene Adler returns, and Rachel McAdams returns as her for a short part in this role. Basically, this follows Jude Law is wanting to get married. He thinks Sherlock Holmes is trying to stop him from getting married because if you've seen the first one, you'll know Sherlock Holmes was not fond of him getting married and being away from him. Nonetheless, basically, Jude Law gets married and they're on their honeymoon, and Moriarty attacks trying to kill Jude Law. Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes meet earlier in the movie, and Moriarty says, no, nobody's off limits. He threatens Sherlock, said he's going to kill him, and he's going to kill Watson, Jude Law's character, of course. So we go on an adventure with these two trying to figure out what Moriarty's up to, and Sherlock Holmes obviously gets beat in this movie. Moriarty does win, in part. This is based on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book, The Death of Sherlock Holmes. That tells you how the movie's going to end, possibly, or does it? But it doesn't follow that story really exactly, but the final set piece is very similar to the final set piece in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, and it's a fantastic ending. I really like this movie. It's just as good as the first one, in my opinion. Maybe the first one's a little bit better, but nonetheless, I think you should check it out, especially if you like the first one. Robert Downey Jr. is great as Sherlock Holmes, and I like a lot of the Guy Ritchie touches that he adds to the movie, although this is a less Guy Ritchie film than most of them. I'd rate it 4 stars. The next thing I watched was Crimson Peak from 2015, directed by Guillermo del Toro. It stars Mia Wasikowska, Jessica Chastain, Tom Hiddleston, and Charlie Hunnam, along with a couple of appearances by Gorman and Jim Beaver in smaller roles. This movie follows the life of an heiress to a company run by Jim Beaver. One day, a man comes in, a baronet from Crimson Peak, which is the house. It's not really Crimson Peak, that's what they call it. Comes in trying to get her father, Jim Beaver, to invest in the company that he's doing to mine this special clay that's at their home at Alder Hill Hall or something like that. Jim Beaver kind of figures out these guys are not exactly who they say they are. His sister, Tom Hiddleston's sister, is played by Jessica Chastain. However, Tom Hiddleston and Mia Wasikowska hit it off, and she is somewhat enamored with him. There's a plot where it shows where he wants to marry her. Jim Beaver's not having it. He finds out that they're kind of scammers, essentially. But that's not really revealed on it till later in the movie, which I won't spoil on what they're doing. So it ends up that Jim Beaver's character dies mysteriously. He's murdered. You see that. And Mia Wasikowska goes to live with Tom Hiddleston, marries him, and his sister in their large manor, which is in disrepair, falling apart. Basically, there's red clay running through the walls. It looks like blood. And she starts to discover some weird things going on at this house. Charlie Hunnam plays a friend of Mia Wasikowska's and a doctor, and he worries for her, and he plays our hero of the film, basically. Everybody's really good in this film. I don't think it's a particularly great film. Guillermo del Toro's certainly done better. The story gets a bit weird. I am going to warn you if you are kind of weirded out by very, very weird stuff. And it's not really a ghost movie. It's advertised as a ghost movie. Ghosts are in it, but I don't think it's that much of a ghost movie. I think you'll enjoy it if you like Guillermo del Toro. I don't think it's one of his best, like I said, but it's worth checking out, I would say. 3.5 stars. Next up is The Iron Giant, a classic animated film from 1999, directed by Brad Bird before he went into the Pixar family and made The Incredibles and a number of other good films with them. He also wrote it too. Starring Jennifer Aniston, Harry Connick Jr., and Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel's the Iron Giant. He doesn't have much to say, kind of like his Groot role. It's interesting that he keeps getting cast for these deep voice single line roles, basically. The Iron Giant follows the story of Hobart, a small child in a small town, and he discovers an iron giant. This meteor crashes to Earth. He goes and sees something going on at the power station. He goes to investigate and discovers the Iron Giant. He's scared to death of it at first, but he befriends the Iron Giant soon after, and befriends Harry Connick Jr.'s character, who is an artist who runs a scrapyard. The Iron Giant likes to eat metal, so he takes him to the scrapyard. Also in there is Chris McDonald as a government agent that's trying to capture the whatever is there. He doesn't know. It eats his car at one point, which is really funny. And Chris McDonald is fantastic in the role, to be honest. He plays the best asshole you can buy, like in Happy Gilmore when he played Shooter McGavin. Nonetheless, the Iron Giant follows this. The military gets involved. Hobart's trying to protect the Iron Giant. The Iron Giant, in a couple of places, you do see that he is a weapon. He almost kills Hobart on a couple of occasions because he doesn't realize what he's doing. We're never really told where the Iron Giant comes from. He's extraterrestrial is what we get from the first of the movie, but we don't know for sure. Nonetheless, this is a great movie, great story. I definitely recommend you check it out. I watched it with my kids. My kids, well, at least one of my kids really enjoyed it, that paid attention to it. It's one of the best animated films ever made. I'm going to say that right now. It is a 5-star film, and you should definitely check out The Iron Giant. It is excellent. Next up is a weird one, Psycho Gorman, made in 2020, directed by Steven Kostanski, who also wrote it. It's starring really no one you've ever heard of, because it is a low-budget kind of sci-fi film. Kind of weird movie. So it follows the story of two kids who, while digging in their backyard, digging a grave for one of the kids, because the sister in this movie is an insane person who says she's going to bury her brother alive, so he digs his own grave. They're playing, but not really. And they discover this thing underground. The sister just happens to put in the right code to release this stone, and it also releases a intergalactic being who was locked onto Earth millennia ago, basically. So he gets out, and he accidentally lets on to the girl that the stone she's holding controls him. He can't hurt her. He can't do anything without her. Well, he can do things, but she can tell him what to do and not do. Unfortunately, the sister in this movie is a psychopath. She's played by a girl named Nita Josie Hanna, and she is really good in this role as a psychopathic kid. She's about, I'd say, 10 years old. The brother is about 11, 12, probably 12-ish. And then there's the parents involved too. So they come up with the name for this guy. They're trying to come up with names, and he hates all the names. He's very good too. Psycho Gorman. They come up with Psycho Gorman, or PG for short, which they think is just the best name. He's not real fond of it at first, but the guy who plays PG, Nathan Namumber or something like that, is really good. I mean, the real conceit of this movie is this is basically Power Rangers if they were a lot more violent and bloody, because every like alien villain, even Psycho Gorman, somewhat looks like a Power Ranger villain. And then the main somewhat antagonist of the movie looks absolutely like a Power Ranger villain. She's like almost Gundam-like as well, but in Power Ranger Gundam type form. So it's a really fun movie. It's really silly. It's got some decent gore in it. If you're not into gore, you won't like it. There's some really funny parts. A lot of the aliens are really funny designs, or goofy. But yeah, Psycho Gorman, the guy who plays Psycho Gorman, is very entertaining in the movie. The kids are pretty good in the movie. So I would recommend you check this one out. 4 stars. It's campy, though. Be prepared. All right, the next film is the 2021 Bond film, No Time to Die. No Time to Die is directed by Cary Joji Fukunaga and starring Daniel Craig, Lea Seydoux, Rami Malek, Ralph Fiennes, Ana de Armas, Lashana Lynch, Ben Whishaw, Christopher Waltz, Naomi Harris, and the great Jeffrey Wright. Obviously, this has a large cast, and that doesn't even capture everyone because you're going to recognize a lot of different faces. But this is essentially the swan song for Daniel Craig. This is his final Bond film, and it is a fantastic send-off for Daniel Craig, who I think ranks right up there with Sean Connery for best Bonds. I would honestly rank a lot, at least Casino Royale, Skyfall, and this film above a lot of the Sean Connery movies, maybe most of them. And I think it's a fantastic film. Bond opens the film in a relationship with Lea Seydoux, which I haven't seen Skyfall in a while. She may have been in the last one, and I don't remember. But nonetheless, he's in a relationship. They seem to be going to get married, or are married, or soon to be married, something like that. And Bond is going to say goodbye to Vesper Lynd, the only other woman he's really ever loved, according to this timeline at least. During that time, Spectre attacks him, and he thinks, Lea Seydoux is part of Spectre. They make it look that way in the film, and she tells him she's not, but he is done with her. He sends her away on a train, and the film kind of takes off from there, and Bond is retired. He's no longer 007. He's retired, and he gets drawn in by Felix Leiter, Jeffrey Wright's character, into something with Spectre, and there's this large plot that they can't figure out, and there's this U.S. Justice Department guy, Logan Ash, that's also with him, that needs him to do this. He's the only one that they trust to do this job. So he gets involved. Well, let's just say, like in most Bond movies, everything really goes sideways. Everything's not as it seems. There's a new 007 played by another character. I'm not even going to spoil it for you. Spectre's involved, and Rami Malek is our main villain in the film, which I think may be the weakest part of the film, honestly. He's a good villain, but he does something really terrible in the film as well. But he's not the strongest Bond villain you'll ever see. I liked him. I like Rami Malek. He plays kind of a crazed person very well, like he has in Mr. Robot, and a number of other things I'm forgetting. But this is a great send-off for Bond. Fantastic movie. It's nearly 3 hours long, and it does not feel like it. It moves at a clip. The action is fast. It's great. It's fantastic. Everybody in it's really good. I would highly recommend you see it. I rank it right. It's probably third favorite of my Craig Bond films, but the top three are all right there together. Casino Royale is the best. Skyfall and this one are pretty close. All right, and now the last film I watched is a movie called Imperium from 2016, directed by Daniel Ragusis and starring Daniel Radcliffe, Toni Collette, Nestor Carbonell, Bern Gorman, and Sam Trammell. This movie was interesting. I've seen it a lot of times, and I finally watched it. You can watch it on HBO Max if you really want to. But Daniel Radcliffe plays a young FBI agent who, at the start of the movie, is part of a terrorist investigation group and gets a terrorist arrested, but he kind of feels like what happened here is not exactly what should have happened. You get that feeling. So he starts working on other cases, and he comes across the white nationalist movements, and he believes that something's going to go down with white nationalists because of some different things that happen. I'm not going to spoil much of this movie. It's also a hard plot to explain. But essentially, Toni Collette pushes him to go undercover with white power groups, and he becomes a skinhead, essentially, and joins a group and works his way up to different facets of the white power community. The Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Alliance, the skinheads. He's with the skinheads at first. They don't really play into the movie that much. Ultimately, it's just how he gets an in. And then he also discovers a whole underground of other people, like a suburban husband that is just large in the movement and has all these people over at his house all the time that you would never suspect. It's an interesting movie. I had a good time watching it. It's very, very timely, to be honest, in this day and age. I think it does make some good points. Some of the writing feels rushed. I will say some of the stuff that Radcliffe is doing in the movie would probably tip some people off that he's a FBI agent or a cop undercover. But for the sake of brevity, I understand why they did that. They aren't able to play it off. There's also this whole plot line with a guy named Dallas Wolf, who's like an online personality of white power. And clearly we're going for a Rush Limbaugh look for him, although Rush Limbaugh was never like quite that blatant as this guy is in the movie. But it leads to an interesting storyline where I think Dallas Wolf is involved, and maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but there's a very interesting storyline that plays out of that. I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Good cast. Sam Trammell's really great in it. Bern Gorman, second movie I watched with him in the last week, because he was also in Crimson Peak. So I definitely would recommend you check this out on HBO Max if you have it. I'd give it 4 stars. All right, so that's all the movies I watched this week. I hope you enjoyed these quick reviews of the movies. I hope it gave you enough information. Obviously, we'd like to see you back next time, and I hope to see you on Basement Movie Room next week when we release another video. Thanks for watching.